chosen one, stop what you are doing right now. Because heaven just made an announcement. Not a whisper, not a maybe, not a someday. An announcement. Loud enough, specific enough, directed enough that it reached you today, in this moment, through this message. Heaven announced a wealth transfer for you. Not for the general public, not for anyone who happens to come across this. For you, specifically, by name, by assignment, by the record of faithfulness that was reviewed before the announcement was made. And what heaven announces, heaven delivers, without exception, without delay beyond the appointed time, without the possibility of human opposition blocking what God declared. The transfer is coming, and it is coming for you. What this transfer looks like, it is not just money, although money is included. It is everything that wealth actually represents in God's economy. It is resources that fund the calling, the provision that makes the assignment possible, the finances that remove the limitations that have been keeping what God placed in you from being fully expressed in the world. It is time wealth, the return of seasons spent in the wrong places, on the wrong things, for the wrong people. God restoring the time that was consumed by what was never supposed to take it, with a compression of what is ahead that makes up for what was lost behind. It is relational wealth, connections that carry influence, access, wisdom, genuine love, the kind of relationships that multiply everything they touch rather than draining everything they access. It is health wealth, restoration of what the hard seasons took physically, energy returning, vitality increasing, the body being restored to carry the assignment with everything it requires. It is peace wealth, the deep settled abundance of a life no longer running on anxiety, no longer fueled by survival mode, no longer operating from a place of barely enough. In every area. All of it is included in what heaven announced. All of it is part of the transfer that is coming for you. Why a transfer and not just a blessing? Because transfers imply that what is coming to you was somewhere else first, held by the wrong hands, positioned in the wrong places, assigned to the wrong accounts, and God is moving it from where it was to where it belongs, which is with you, in the hands of someone who went through the exam season, who passed the faithfulness test, who can be trusted with what provision at this level requires of the one who carries it. Some of what is being transferred was held by people who were never the rightful owners, who accumulated through methods that God never endorsed, and He is now redirecting what was taken, what was blocked, what was diverted, away from where it was always supposed to land, back toward you. Some of what is being transferred was simply waiting in a kind of divine holding for the moment the recipient was ready, because provision released prematurely into unprepared hands produces damage rather than blessing, and God was too faithful to release what He prepared for you before you were prepared to receive it well. But the exam is finished, the preparation is complete, the hands that will receive this transfer have been tested for exactly this moment, and the holding period is over. What blocked it before? Not God. God was never the blockage. He was always the one working to remove the blockages that came from other sources. mindsets that created invisible ceilings, the belief that wealth was for other people, that financial overflow was reserved for those with different backgrounds, different education, different connections, different starting points. Those mindsets were not your fault. They were handed to you by generations that believed them and lived accordingly, and handed them forward without realizing they were handing limitations alongside everything else they passed down. But God interrupted that inheritance in you, and the mindsets that blocked the transfer before have been dismantled through the exam season, through the stretching, through the seasons of barely enough that forced the question, is God really my source? And your answer through every tight season was yes, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. That yes dismantled the ceiling that previous generations never got free from, and what the ceiling blocked is now unblocked. People who were positioned as gatekeepers over what was assigned to you have been moved, some by their own decisions, some by God's direct intervention, some by circumstances that repositioned them away from the access they had over what was never theirs to control, and the gates they were keeping are now open. Spiritual opposition that was legally assigned against your financial breakthrough through agreements made in fear, in desperation, in the generational wounds that gave the enemy access has been canceled through the surrender, the forgiveness, the healing that the exam season produced in you. The legal ground is cleared. The gatekeepers are moved, the mindsets are dismantled, and the transfer has nothing left standing between it and your hands. What you must do to receive it. Align your thinking with what heaven announced. Stop thinking like someone who does not have enough, and start thinking like someone who is receiving a transfer that heaven already declared complete. Because what you consistently think about yourself financially becomes the filter through which provision either flows or gets blocked. At the level of your own belief, the transfer can be declared from heaven and still be blocked at the level of your reception, if your mind is still operating from the old programming of lack, of barely enough, of wealth being for other people. Upgrade the thinking to match the announcement. Move in alignment with it. Faith without corresponding action is incomplete, and the action required is not always large. Sometimes it is the decision to prepare for what is coming before it arrives, to steward what is currently in your hands as if the transfer has already happened. Because in heaven's account, it already has. The declaration was made, which means in the spiritual realm, it is already done. Your job is to align your natural life with what is already true in the spiritual one. Release what is blocking it. In your hands right now, is there something you have been holding on to out of fear that is actually blocking the flow of what God is trying to release? Generosity is often the final key that unlocks what provision was waiting for permission to fully flow. Not because God needs your money, because generosity is the declaration that you trust Him as your source more than you trust the amount currently in your hands. And that trust is what makes a receiving vessel large enough for a heaven-declared transfer to land in completely. What this transfer will produce beyond you, this is the part that gives the transfer its full significance. It was never just for you. It was always for what flows through you. The people you are assigned to help cannot be helped by a version of you that is constrained by lack. The mission God placed in you cannot be fully funded by a version of you operating in barely enough. The legacy you are supposed to leave cannot be built by a version of you who does not have access to the resources the legacy requires. The transfer is not coming to make you comfortable. It is coming to make you effective at the level God always intended for your assignment. And the people whose lives will change because of what flows through you after the transfer arrives are the real reason heaven made the announcement with the urgency it was made with. Because their waiting is connected to your receiving. Their breakthrough is linked to your overflow. Their healing, their provision, their own encounter with God is sitting on the other side of what flows through you when what heaven announced fully arrives in your hands. That is why this matters, not just for your life, for every life, that your life in overflow is positioned to touch. What changes when the transfer lands? The first thing you will notice is not the amount. It is the atmosphere, the constant low-frequency anxiety about money, about provision, about whether there will be enough for what the next season requires, lifts. And what replaces it is a settledness, a confidence that does not require a specific number in an account to remain present, because it is rooted not in the transfer itself, but in the God who announced it, and whose announcements never return void. Then the practical changes begin. Conversations that were previously unavailable start opening, because wealth creates access to rooms that are closed to people who do not carry it. And what those rooms contain in terms of further opportunity, further connection, further assignment advancement, multiplies what the transfer started far beyond the initial amount that arrived. Generosity becomes natural, not forced, not calculated, not given from a place of hoping there will be enough left after the giving, but given from the overflow that keeps being replenished faster than it is released. Because that is how God's economy works for the one who has aligned their life with His purposes and received what heaven announced with open hands and an open heart. Final word. Heaven announced a wealth transfer for you, not eventually, in this season, for this version of you that walked through the exam, that passed the faithfulness test, that aligned their life with God's purposes consistently through seasons that made consistency the most expensive option available. The transfer is real. The announcement was made. The blockages have been cleared. The gatekeepers have been moved. The mindsets have been dismantled. The season is right, and your hands are ready to receive what heaven declared was always meant for them. Do not shrink from it. Do not minimize it. Do not talk yourself out of believing that something this significant could really be for someone like you. It is for someone exactly like you. Someone who was faithful when faithfulness was costly. Someone who trusted God when trust was the harder option. Someone who stayed when leaving was available, and who is now standing on the receiving end of a heaven-declared transfer that changes not just your life, but every life that your life in overflow is positioned to touch. Receive it fully, completely, without apology, without hesitation, without the smallness that the old season required. You are not in the old season anymore. You are in the transfer season, and it is everything heaven promised it would be. In the comments, write, "I receive my heaven-declared wealth transfer now," or the number 888, or "The transfer is real and it is coming from me." Subscribe and stay close. Chosen one, heaven made the announcement. The transfer is coming. Position yourself, open your hands, and receive what God declared was always meant to be yours. Amen.
What the transfer reveals about God's timing. He was never late, not once, in the entire season you waited for what felt like it should have come sooner. He was never behind schedule, never distracted, never unaware of the pressure you were under. While the transfer was being prepared, His timing looked late from your vantage point, because your vantage point could only see the need and the absence of the supply. But God's vantage point sees the full picture. The preparation of the recipient the positioning of the resources, the removal of every blockage, the alignment of every factor that needed to be in place for the transfer to land completely rather than partially. And completely is always worth waiting for, because a partial transfer released too soon, before the ground was ready, before the hands were prepared, before the mindset was upgraded, would have produced less than what the full transfer, released at the appointed time, is about to produce. God was not withholding, He was perfecting the timing of something too important to rush. And now that everything is aligned, the appointed time has arrived, and what God releases at the appointed time arrives with everything it was designed to carry, completely intact, perfectly positioned, ready to produce exactly what heaven announced it would produce in your life. What the transfer does to your fear of lack. Lack has been a language spoken in your life for a very long time, not because God wanted it that way, because patterns established in previous generations created a familiarity with not enough that became the default expectation for what financial life looked like. And familiar things, even painful familiar things, feel safer than unfamiliar ones, which is why overflow can feel threatening to someone whose nervous system was calibrated to lack. But the transfer does something to that calibration. It does not just change the bank account, it changes the baseline expectation for what is normal. The more consistently provision flows, the more the nervous system recalibrates from expecting barely enough to expecting more than enough. From bracing for the next financial crisis to trusting the God who proved faithful through the last one and the one before that and every one before that. The transfer breaks the fear of lack, not by removing every financial challenge, but by demonstrating so clearly through its arrival that God is a provider whose provision is not limited by any circumstance the enemy tried to create or maintain around your financial life. What stewarding the transfer requires. God watches what you do with what He sends, not to catch you doing something wrong, to see if what He can trust you with next is larger or smaller than what He sent first. Because transfers are not one-time events in God's economy. They are tests of stewardship that open access to what comes after. The transfer that arrives in this season is the beginning, not the ceiling, and what you do with the beginning determines what God releases next. Steward it with intentionality. Know where it goes. Give it direction aligned with purpose, not just comfort. Steward it with generosity, because generosity is the proof of trust, and trust is what qualifies you for the next level of what God has been preparing to release. Steward it with humility, remembering clearly that what arrived was not produced by your cleverness, your strategy, or your effort alone. It was declared by heaven and delivered by God. And what God delivers requires God to be honored in how it is used. What the people around you will witness. They will see the shift before you fully explain it. The ones who watched the tight seasons, who saw you trust God when trusting looked foolish, who witnessed the faithfulness that qualified you for what just arrived, will see the transfer manifest in your life, and it will do something in them, something powerful. It will reignite faith that had grown cold in people who stopped believing that God still moves in specific, personal, financial ways in the lives of real people going through real things. Your testimony of this transfer will be the most powerful financial sermon anyone in your circle has ever witnessed, not from a pulpit, from your life. And the faith it reignites in people watching will produce their own prayers, their own alignment, their own positioning for what God has been waiting to release into their lives as well. Your transfer triggers a chain reaction of belief in everyone positioned to witness it. What God wants you to know about overflow. It is not the exception for His children. It is the design. Lack was never the plan. Barely enough was never the intention. Survival mode was never the blueprint. God's original design for His children was overflow, was more than enough, was a life so abundantly provided for that the provision itself became a testimony of who their God was and what He was capable of for the ones who walked with Him. The enemy distorted that design through generations of agreements with lack, through the belief systems that made poverty spiritual and abundance suspicious. But God is restoring the original design in the lives of those who aligned themselves with His purposes and trusted Him through the seasons that tested whether they believed His promises were for them personally, not just for people in a book written thousands of years ago. You believed it was for you, through seasons that made that belief the most expensive option available. And God is honoring that belief with the overflow that was always the original design for a life surrendered to Him. A word for the one struggling to receive this. Some of you read this and felt hope rise, but also felt resistance. A part of you that immediately began listing reasons why this might not be for you specifically, why someone else might qualify more than you do, why your situation is different, more complicated, more disqualified than the kind of person this kind of announcement is usually for. That resistance is not wisdom. It is the last strategy of an enemy who knows that if you receive this announcement fully, his access to your financial life is permanently over. So he uses your own voice to argue against your own blessing in the most convincing way possible, because your voice is the one you trust most. Do not let him borrow it for this purpose. Recognize the resistance as interference, not discernment, and choose to receive what heaven announced with the same faith you used to survive every hard season that qualified you for this moment. You are not disqualified. You are the reason the announcement was made. Receive it. Final word. Heaven announced a wealth transfer for you, not eventually, in this season, for this version of you that walked through the exam, that passed the faithfulness test, that aligned their life with God's purposes consistently through seasons that made consistency the most expensive option available. The transfer is real. The announcement was made. The blockages have been cleared. The gatekeepers have been moved. The mindsets have been dismantled. The season is right, and your hands are ready to receive what heaven declared was always meant to be yours. Do not shrink from it. Do not minimize it. Do not talk yourself out of believing that something this significant could really be for someone like you. It is for someone exactly like you. Someone who was faithful when faithfulness was costly. Someone who trusted God when trust was the harder option. Someone who stayed when leaving was available, and who is now standing on the receiving end of a heaven-declared transfer that changes not just your life, but every life your life in overflow is positioned to touch. Receive it fully, completely, without apology, without hesitation, without the smallness that the old season required. You are not in the old season anymore. You are in the transfer season, and it is everything heaven promised it would be. In the comments write, "I receive my heaven-declared wealth transfer now," or the number 888, or "The transfer is real and it is coming for me." Subscribe and stay close. Chosen one, heaven made the announcement. The transfer is coming. Position yourself, open your hands, and receive what God declared was always meant to be yours. Amen.